Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Couple of Nukes. As always, I'm your host, Mr. Whiskey, and today we are going to be getting into a couple of different topics. We're going to get into what our childhood trauma and the things that happen can be used for, how they shape us, what happens when we're diagnosed late in life with a condition, whether that's ADHD, autism, a combination of both. And we're going to talk about identity, purpose, and everything going into that. And then, of course, most importantly, spreading awareness and having these conversations. It's so important to have these conversations. And I think there's a lot of fluff out there going around. There's a lot of overabundance of people claiming these words or that. And, I think the reason I want to have this conversation is the importance of getting the people who actually need the help, the right information, getting the help. And I hope this reaches a lot of young adults who are maybe feeling out of place and have not been diagnosed yet. And hopefully we can share some of the things to help encourage you and to help you be able to navigate life a little more easily. And here to help me do that today, we have Ellie Capstick calling from across the world. I'm in Japan, she's over there in the Europe area. So who knows what time it is there? It's nighttime here, but I love that we're able to have these global conversations about matters that, as we're highlighting here, affect people in every country. We're all human beings and we need to come together and talk about these kinds of conversations. So, Ellie, so great to have you here.
Thank you, Mr. Whiskey. I'm in the UK. I'm quite sad that you didn't know that. But thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure. I must say, I was a little nervous today, as I said to you when I come on, because the Nukes bit threw me a little bit. But I'm rest assured I'm good now. So thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And yeah, we can hear the UK. We didn't need to, state it. We can hear it loud and proudly. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I am 40 years old. I am a woman. I all my life I thought I was different, but I thought that that was down to childhood trauma. I didn't fit in anywhere. At 10 years old, I was like having existential crises. At 12-year old, I was looking for God. Like I just didn't fit in anywhere. And I put all of that down to trauma that I had experienced as a child. It's only, I've got children now that are adults, they're in their 20s. So it's only when I had my children that people kept coming up to me and saying they're presenting with signs of autism or ADHD. And I was really offended. Like, I was like, whoa, like that's not the thing that you say to people. But that's because at the time I didn't know much about neurodivergence. So they all got diagnosed with some kind of neurodivergence. And then I started looking into myself and I was like, actually, my kids are very similar to me. And I'm very similar to my dad, but I put my dad's traits down to childhood trauma too, because he'd had a traumatic childhood. So I couldn't tell what was from the childhood and what was from neurodivergence. But in my late 30s, I also got diagnosed with neurodivergence. And it's made sense of my whole life. I mean, it's come with a lot of relief. It's come with a lot of grief because I'm like, what if I would have known sooner? I would have had the right tools to channel it. I wouldn't have beat myself up so bad. And, and if I would have known when I had my children, when I used to see my children displaying autistic traits, I would try and stop them doing it because I didn't want them to be like me. I would be like, I didn't want them to get bullied. Didn't want them to
Mm.
be outcasts. So I'm so passionate about people learning about neurodiversity so that they don't beat themselves up their whole life. So they know actually there's nothing wrong with neurodiversity. We can be very successful, but we need to use a different skill set. So, if you're neurodivergent and you've grown up and you've gone to mainstream schools, which is absolutely fine, you spend your life being taught by a teacher that's a fish, right? And you're in a class with people that are fish and they're like, Ellie, do this, swim. And Ellie can't swim. And Ellie feels like shit because Ellie can't do anything that the other kids are doing, and that is neurodivergent children experience 20% apparently more criticism in their childhood than neurotypical children. So I've gone through my life hearing criticism and I didn't actually understand it's actually just the way my brain works. And if I have the right tools, then I can do life. But I couldn't do life the way they were doing it. So I would beat myself up and I would feel bad and everyone would criticize me. So I'm really, really passionate about people learning from early now that yes, you're neurodivergent. No, there's nothing wrong with you. It is bloody difficult. It is really difficult, but there is a tool set that can help you. And we need to explore it together, because so many people have got to the age of 40, just realized out that they're neurodivergent, but they've had so much trauma from just beating themselves up and thinking, why aren't I normal? Like, why can't I do things like other people? And they've had so much criticism their whole life. It's that, there's suicide rates is quite high. The addiction rates is quite high. We have a predisposition to addiction anyway, because the ADHD side, and then once you've got trauma, that addiction cycle can, it's hard. I'm just really keen on people learning, okay, you're neurodivergent. It doesn't actually mean you're broken. Yes, it's quite shitty at times. I struggle a lot with a lot of things, but I'm going to use a different tool set and it's going to work for me. So that's it in a nutshell.
Right. And we're at a turning point, really, because of just the change in mindset around this. For example, I've interviewed a lot of people who, when they were growing up, people a bit older than you, when they were growing up, they were told that they were just stupid. Or like you talked about that harsh criticism. It was,
Yeah.
hey, you're really dumb or you're struggling with this. And a lot of them were actually dyslexic. I had a
Yeah.
guy on the show jokingly say I was
Yes.
dyslexic,
Dyslexia,
which
neurodivergent. Yeah.
yeah, during my time period was you're stupid. We had a gentleman who he couldn't read the board because he needed glasses, but his father said, "No, you're not getting glasses. You have good eyesight, and if you get glasses, you're this kind of person." So stuff like that has really held back an entire generation. And I think we're at a turning point now where we are becoming more aware, inclusive, and helping these students navigate where we have different class structures or different online systems. So I think we're at a turning point now where we still have, some generations that were affected by it, but hopefully moving forward, we're starting to build that system that will help people be in the right place to properly learn. Even just learning styles. We've come a long way of knowing some people are more audible, some people are more visual, some people are kinesthetic, right? We've really begun to be more properly informed on how can we best teach and educate. It used to just be, I'm going to yell at you and I'm going to do it once and you should be able to do it. We're
Yeah, and
shifting from that.
I grew up like that as well. And when I started having my children, I thought ashamedly that is how it works. And when they wasn't getting it, I would be like, okay, if I yell you more, they might get it. So I understand that completely, but we're so lucky that there has become this shift. But with this shift has become a lot of people saying, oh, I have ADHD, I forget my keys. I have ADHD, oh,
Mhm.
I'm so cute and forgetful. And I think a lot of people that are really struggling, they're like, oh my God, there must be something more serious with me, because I don't just forget my keys. I forget to go to the bathroom and I piss myself. Like, ADHD is that serious. ADHD has a lot more than, oh, I just forgot what I walked into the room for. And I think a lot of people now think, oh, I must have something more serious than autism or ADHD, because my symptoms are much worse. And I think sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes in the media or TikTok or anywhere like this, ADHD is becoming a little trivialized, and it's
Mhm.
becoming like it's just forgetfulness, but it's not. It's something that I've struggled with my whole life. I've been to therapy. I've been sectioned at times. There's been a lot that's come from being, or I'm AuDHD, so that's a mix of autism and ADHD. So ADHD is where you're more impulsive, you have that need for novelty, and in my head it presents like a drunk teenager, right? So like all excitable, it's different for everyone, but in my head that's how it presents. And then the other half of my head, I've got an old man that wants to sit at home with his pipe, with his slippers, have everything routine, military, like, okay. So these two people in my head are fighting, and I feel like I'm never good enough because I can never make this one happy, and I can never make this one
Mm,
happy. So,
mm,
ADHD is the two neurodivergences together of autism and ADHD, but it presents as such a paradox and such a conflict, and it's really hard. So I think that nobody really understands the gravity of that when people on the internet go, I'm a little bit ADHD, I forget my keys, because I think that's what people think ADHD is. And when people are saying, I can't go to work and work like a normal person because I'm ADHD, people are like, come on, you can work, you're just ADHD. But I don't think a lot of people realize how serious ADHD and autism can be.
Right. We see that happening a lot with a lot of different conditions. I've seen
Yeah.
the worst part is there are some women out there faking Tourette's or Down syndrome or using other filters or voice things to support their pornographic career or to get more attention. Like you said, it's cute. And I think the sad part, like you said, is now it takes away the attention from the people who actually need it. And it really highlights one symptom of many. And dyslexia is a great example. I've interviewed a couple experts on dyslexia on this podcast because of media. I grew up thinking dyslexia was just the rearrangement of letters in your brain when you read. That's a single symptom. And it's the most cinematic symptom that people show in movies and TVs, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on. And sometimes we get so focused on a symptom that we forget that there's so much more, like you said. And I think
Yeah.
it's hard because there is a spectrum. And so some people are really severe and some people are not as much. And some people claim it just to claim it, as you mentioned. And I hate that some people are using it as an excuse to be lazy or to be forgetful or to justify something. And then there's people who are actually struggling. That's just terrible. And so I'm glad we're having this conversation in the work that you do. And thank you for clarifying the difference between, autism and ADHD. And like you said, it's very different for everyone. So I
Yeah.
encourage you, if you think you have it, get help and don't just see one doctor. In my personal opinion, see multiple people. I
Yeah.
really believe in more opinions and just to kind of verify that. But I want to go
Especially,
go
sorry,
ahead. No, no, go ahead.
especially with neurodivergence, because so when we grow up being neurodivergent, not all, I say everything, but it's always a not all. Once you meet one
Right.
neurodivergent person, you've met one. I'm not saying for everyone, but a lot of neurodivergent people, when we grow up, we mask, which means we try to assimilate to be like everyone else around us. So if I was around, I don't know, cowboys, I would, it just came to my head. I
Right.
would like assimilate the cowboy culture and I would become that to be what one of, I'm a social chameleon. So I think when a lot of women and men go to the doctors and, non-binary, and they say, I think I'm neurodivergent, they're so used to fitting in with the people that nobody sees. I look to a certain extent normal, whatever
Mm,
normal is. And people are like, no, you've not got something wrong with you. You present as normal, you talk normal, you're able to go on a podcast and have a conversation. Therefore, you must be okay. But that's not always the case. So I think for neurodivergent people, because they seem normal, people think, oh no, they must be making it up, but nobody actually sees the struggle behind it.
mm. I think that's an excellent point, especially with the masking, because when you feel different, you usually don't want to be different, especially when I know looking back at places in my childhood, especially where I was different and I did not mind being different and I chose to be who I was and I was punished for it or
Yeah.
seemingly punished for it. And
Yeah,
so
which is
there
what
is,
I experienced my whole life. So I just got really good at being like you. Like, just if you're some way, I'm going to be the same way. I'm going to copy you and I'm going to copy every symptom. So every time a lot of neurodivergent people go to the doctors or something to get diagnosed, they copy the doctor and mirror the doctor.
mm,
So the doctor's not even hip to it yet. They're not even clocking on, actually the person is just copying me.
right. Well, and that's one of the issues with mental health examinations. I'll give you, at least I've seen this military side, and I'm sure civilian side they do as well, is you go to the doctor and the nurse sees you first, and she gives you a paper sheet that has on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? And you're thinking, okay, based on what number, what are they going to respond with? And of
Yeah.
course, I want to get help, but I don't want to be quote locked up. So how do I
Yeah.
answer this and fill it out accordingly? A lot
And
of us are, like you said, trying to predict how the doctor will respond or feel. But
yes,
sometimes we need a response that is different from what we want. What we want and need are different, and sometimes we block our own help, and it's really unfortunate. I want to backtrack and take a look at your childhood. You
yeah.
mentioned some trauma going on, and I'd love
Mhm.
to just discuss that in general, just standalone, and then in compound with the AUDHD, how those two affected each other looking back. Because as
Yeah.
you mentioned, you didn't know at the time. So
Yeah.
I'd like to unpack some of that trauma.
So I experienced childhood sexual abuse, not from either of my parents. I never say who the person was because it's not just my story to tell. It's affected a lot of
Mm,
people
mm,
in my life, but I must say it wasn't my brother, my sister, or my parents. So I experienced that as a child. From I can't actually say how old I was because I was so young that you don't know at that age how old you were. But I was
mm,
somewhere between two, and it carried on till I was about five. Um, Obviously I didn't know it was a bad thing because when you're two you don't know what that is. So when I was growing up, I would think about it a lot. I only disclosed it to my mother when I was 12, and she's done absolutely everything that she could to help me. She was great. But from then people were like, oh, that explains why Ellie's a little bit, because she's
mm.
gone through all of this trauma. So I was like, yeah, that makes sense. That's why I'm the way I am. That's why I'm a 12-year-old looking for God, and that's why I'm a 12-year-old with these OCD traits. And it started to explain a lot to me. So I just put everything down to the trauma that I'd gone through. But actually, a lot of the symptoms of trauma and neurodivergence are the same, because if you've had trauma, you are sometimes prone to masking, and neurodivergence you mask. You're also, if you've gone through trauma, you can be prone to like OCD like symptoms, and neurodivergence you can. So there is so many crossovers. So now when I do something, I don't know if it's something that came from my trauma or if it's something that came from my neurodivergence. But all, of course, neurodivergence can sometimes make you more susceptible to trauma because you are more
Mm.
vulnerable. I hate saying this because I'm not a vulnerable person, I don't think, right? I look like I can stand up for myself and, I won't take any shit. But I am a vulnerable person at the end of the day. I've had people who have told me, when you're neurodivergent and you've experienced 20% more criticism in your life, your self-esteem is bullshit, right?
Mm.
So basically, if somebody tells you, oh, you're amazing, you're beautiful, I'm going to do this for you, don't tell your mummy, or don't tell you're very susceptible to abuse because you have a very low self-esteem. Sometimes you take things at face value. Sometimes you don't understand little caveats and things like that. So it does
Right.
make you more susceptible to sexual abuse as a child or adult, narcissistic abuse as an adult, because you cling on to something because you feel like low self-worth because you've experienced so much criticism your whole life. So not only is neurodivergence traumatic in itself, it can, and not always, of course, with everything I say, but it can make our children and ourselves more susceptible to
Mm.
any kind of abuse growing up because we are more vulnerable.
Right. And so, like you said, a lot of the trauma and then the neurodivergence overlap. So, how do we go about the filtration, the determination of what is what? Is there like a firm test that we can just say, hey, it's this or it's that? What is kind of the process?
Do you know what? I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. Um, I think for me, for a long time, I thought it was trauma. I thought my dad was the way he was because he'd had trauma, and that was why we're both similar. Even when I first went for my ADHD autism tests, which are two separate tests, they told me, because my dad, now I know he's autistic, right? But he brought us up like under a regime. It's not
Mm,
his fault. He's just, that's how his brain worked. We wasn't allowed to wear red. We wasn't allowed to walk under ladders. There was so many quirky things, and he brought us up very like that. And I thought my dad was very normal. Must copy your parents, because this is the
mm,
autistic side of me.
right,
I
right.
I, I try and emulate what my parents are because they are my role models. So when I went for my neurodivergence test, they said we can't tell whether this is your trauma, we can't tell whether this is learnt behavior, we can't tell whether this is nature, and we can't tell whether this is nurture. So you need to go for
Mm,
some therapy, and then you need to return to us and see what happens. I went for a lot of different opinions and a lot of different things to get my diagnosis in the end. And my diagnosis now, I feel like, fits for me. I don't know, maybe I'm not neurodivergent, I've been diagnosed, maybe it is just trauma. We never fully know, it's not God telling me,
mm,
it's a doctor, and I'll never know. But I feel validated, and I feel like, yes, that profile does fit with me. And I think, neurodivergent exam or test is very expensive. So we have a lot of people now
Hmm.
self-diagnosing themselves as neurodivergent.
100%. Yeah.
And I do think sometimes I used to think, oh, I'm not sure I like that, not sure. But actually, I think it's valid now. Sometimes if you know, them tests are very expensive here in the UK to get tested for both ADHD and autism together, the two separate tests, but putting the price together is about £3,000. Not everyone has that money. Not everyone has the ability, especially if you've got neurodivergence, to keep filling out the forms, keep going back to the doctors, and it's a long process.
Right.
So I do feel like we have to make room for self-diagnosis
Mm.
as well. I do think that's an important thing. So when people come to my group, because I've got a community of 48,000 or something of neurodivergent people in my group, and a lot of them are self-diagnosed. And in the beginning, the people I was working with said, oh, should we take self-diagnosed people? And we think it's completely valid, because not everyone can go through that process. And that's it.
Right. And the hope is in the future it'll become more accessible for people to do this as it becomes more important and more even really necessary to have this filtration system to prepare people for education better and to
Yeah,
prevent people from just self-diagnosing. I think it's important. And, that's a whole conversation on its own, whether the government should provide for that or not, which I mean, it's for public health and it is for the improvement of our society, but
yeah,
that's they like to spend money on other stuff. But I think it's important, and I hope that conversations like this continue to spread the
yeah,
idea of making testing more accessible and easy to navigate, especially for the people who, like you said, it can be a very difficult process for them, and they want to get the help. And like you said, I think it's really not about the diagnosis. Like you said, you could go and they could say it's trauma or it's neurodivergence
yeah.
or
They're not
it's something
always right.
else.
They're
Right,
not God. They didn't, or whatever belief you believe in. They
right,
didn't make you. Neurodivergence is probably the term is a social construct. Who's to say I'm not normal and that other people aren't divergent? You know what I mean?
right.
So, but but yeah, I completely agree. It needs to be a conversation that's had.
Right. And my point with that especially is whether it was trauma, whether it was neurodivergence, or whether it was something else, I think the really important focal point is, well, what do we do from there? It's not about am I going to use this as an excuse to, blame everything on this or blame that person? I think the real focal point is now that I have this knowledge, how can I
What am
best
I
move
doing?
forward?
And
Yeah.
that's what I'm so passionate about. So I have three adult children, and that are between the ages of 18 and 22. um I didn't know they was neurodivergent at first, because I was young when I had them, and I didn't know much about neurodivergence myself. Even though I was neurodivergent, I didn't even know myself. They were very, very smart. I didn't homeschool them. They went to a mainstream school. It would have been great if I could homeschool them. I homeschooled my youngest child, but I couldn't. They had surpassed me by the time that they were like 5. But what is I don't think that one of them I'm speaking about specifically, and they know this. I can't see them getting on in a real world where they're working for the system, working for the man. I don't see that being a thing for them. So their obsession or their hyper focus is guitars. They are so
Mm.
intelligent. They know everything about guitars. They know how to fix guitars, know how to play guitars. So I've made it my passion from when they were little. You will learn every single thing about guitar, because that is your strong point, and you can be a luthier, you can be a guitar teacher. I need to give this child who is now an adult a different toolkit and a different strategy.
Right.
I just can't send this child to school, say learn maths, English, blah blah blah, and then go and work, for the system. It won't always work like that. You need
Mhm.
to take your gifts and your hyper focuses, and you need to learn to channel them. And as parents of neurodivergent children, this is what I'm really passionate about, because it's only something I've learned recently, and I wish that I would have always known it, so I could give all of my kids that boost and, make their hyper focus their career field. Now you can make anything your career field. And I'm not saying it's easy. And we're all at different points. Some neurodivergent people, they can't do them things, and that's okay. But my hyper focus is neurodivergence, funnily enough. And it's what I like to talk about. And so my Facebook got shut down in February, for talking about, I don't know, probably political stuff or something like this, right? So my Facebook got shut down in February, and I started a new Facebook, which was Ellie, and I didn't want to use my surname because I'm not a very sociable person, so I didn't want people from school to find me, but I still wanted to use Facebook. And so I thought, what can I call myself? And then I was like, do you know what? All my life, I'm either lazy Ellie, weird Ellie, chatty Ellie, Ellie that can't make eye contact. And I thought, as a joke, I'm going to call myself Ellie AuDHD, because that label I'm okay with now. It's better than all of them shit labels I've always had. So I
Mm.
call myself Ellie AuDHD, and I kept getting people with AuDHD following me. At this time, I didn't have my profile picture and stuff like that. I was never comfortable with social media. I still use a filter. Like, I'm not comfortable being on a screen presence. That's just not me. But I kept getting these neurodivergent people following me, and they kept reaching out and asking me questions. And then I started making videos and stuff. And for some reason, I just slipped into this neurodivergence thing, where
Right.
now I've become some kind of public speaker, which is never what I intended, because I couldn't think of anything worse. But since it's my hyper focus, it's kind of worked for me. I do coaching and I do mentorship as well, and and a podcast, and I've been able now to kind of base that around my hyper focus, which is neurodivergence. So hyper focus is really a gift, and these day and age, you can make a job out of anything. The internet has a lot of crazy bad things about it, but it also comes with a lot of good things if you've got a hyper focus. So now we can gear our kids up with that toolkit and that strategy to do something that they're good at. And they don't have to feel like, oh, I'm shit because I can't do maths, I can't do English like everyone else, I can't concentrate. No, we're going to find your gift and we're going to channel that.
For sure. I've always been a huge fan, and I butted heads with my parents a lot over this of the non-traditional path. If someone said,
Yeah.
I want to be a magician or a comedian or a pianist or whatever it was, I was always in support of the creative careers, especially nowadays, with English, math, and everything else being so, digitalized and AI'd and everything. I'm not saying those things aren't important, but I agree
Yeah.
with the hyper focus. In fact, when I interviewed the dyslexia professors and experts, that was how they could get someone who struggled with reading, hated reading. But if you gave them a book that was in their hyper focus, as you mentioned, they would read it. And that's for teaching in general. When it's something you're passionate about, it gets done so much better. And that's one of my issues with college and school is there's a lot of mandatory classes that aren't relevant to your life, to what you're passionate about, or what you even want to pursue, especially in college, but they're just mandatory. You have to take these classes, usually because it makes the college more money, and then they have the stuff. And I think it's just a waste of time. It's a waste of the professor's
I
time to
agree.
teach people who don't care about the subject. It's a waste of time for the people who have to spend time and money, studying and researching, filling their brain with knowledge that they're going to dump out. That they
Yeah,
could have been
I
learning
never
other
use
stuff.
I never used any of my cookery or any of my, there was a lot of lessons that I'd done a lot of time on, and I'm never going to use them. And, I homeschool my daughter that's 9. Luckily, I work from home, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to try this homeschooling thing. So I homeschool her, and we do English, we do maths, we touch upon science. She'll still be able to set her exams and stuff like that. But I also teach her a lot of life skills, her hyper focus. I don't know if she's neurodivergent at all. It could be learned, it could be in her, who knows? But it doesn't matter because she's not going to school. She doesn't need to feel that validation. Everyone she's surrounded with is a bit of everything. But her hyper focus is horses and cowboys. Like, she is so hyper focused on horses, right? It is her thing. She lives and breathes horses. And I just feel like if I'd sent her to school and they were just like sitting her down doing maths, history, science, blah blah blah, she wouldn't have got anything out of it. I can sit her down at home and I can make everything related to horses somehow, even maths and English. We just need, but not everyone's got time for that. Parents
Right.
work, but I just feel like the school system is teaching a group of fish, and if you're not a fish, you're gonna feel like shit. you're going to feel like, why can't I be like everyone else? And I don't want everyone to grow up with that trauma. Life is hard enough.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's going to have trauma,
Mm.
all our no one's going to get through, they are, but some people are, but not everyone's going to get through life without facing sexual abuse or parents problems or parents divorcing. We're all going to have this
Right.
bit, and I just don't want everyone to have this added trauma. So let's try and minimize it as much as we can.
100%. And I'm very curious. So you had your first child around 18, 19, with a traumatic childhood, with undiagnosed neurodivergence. I mean, was that a very intimidating time, or was that what you were really passionate about, or was that from sexual abuse, or what was the story with that?
No, my sexual abuse was long gone by then. That was only something that happened till when I was about 6 years old, probably.
Mm,
Um, I then become quite a vulnerable teenager. I was looking for love. I was looking for acceptance. I was
right.
looking for answers. I met my partner, who wasn't that much older than me, and he wasn't the greatest guy in the earth. He's probably slightly narcissistic, but there wasn't any major problems. It's not like he trafficked me, or there's nothing crazy like that. I fell pregnant with my child, and I had my child, and my child is now 22, and I've always had custody of my child. It's always been me and my child. I love my child to death, but I probably should have had my child now. Now I know myself. I've got children in their 20s, and I've got a children of 9, and a child of 9, and I can see the difference in mothering.
Right.
I had a lot of trauma. I was neurodivergent. I was a single parent. I was young. I tried my best, but I didn't know what was wrong with me. All the time, the baby would cry, and I'd be like, "Oh my God, why is this, sensory driving me crazy?" Like, and
Mm,
I always done the best for my child. I can't. I don't think any other parent loves their children. My children are a bit like my obsession. It's a little bit weird, and so I love my children so much. But for them, I should have definitely had them older, when I knew myself and I was able to help them the best they can. Because I feel like if I'd had them older, I would have been able to invest more authentic me into them, and they would have had such a better quality of life. But as it is, they are amazing people. They are the kindest people I know, sometimes a little bit too kind. So I'm a people pleaser, and I've always been a people pleaser because my self-worth is low. So my children have seen me people please over the years, and they have become, quite low in confidence, and they try and people please to make people happy. So there are quirks from me that they've picked up, which
mm,
if they were born now, they wouldn't have seen them quirks, because I'm not like that anymore. But they've still
mm.
grown up to be confident, super intelligent people. And I'm so glad I had them. I wouldn't change having them at that age I was, because they wouldn't be the kids they are now, or the adults they are now. But I wish I knew myself better before I had them, because they deserve the best possible chance, and that would have given them the best possible chance. But life doesn't come with a rule book, and we're just making the best out of what we've got. So now I'm doing my best to prove myself to them. I'm trying, don't get me wrong, I was a young mum, but I never left them with anyone. They were never them kids that go to their nans all the time, or their grandmas, because their mum's partying. I was with them all the time. Like, I give them everything, but they did see meltdowns and sensory overloads and things that they shouldn't have seen. Because if I would have known I
Mm.
was neurodivergent, I would have been like, okay, this is neurodivergence, and this is why I'm doing it. But at the time, I didn't know why I was crazy. I was like, what's wrong with me, And I was still going for narcissistic people because I was vulnerable. So yeah, that is the only thing that was really affected. But so now I'm just doing my best so nobody else has to go through this. And I think that they
Right.
appreciate that as well, because I say to them, I'm so sorry I wasn't diagnosed. I didn't know what was wrong with me. You saw a lot of meltdowns in your childhood, and you went through things that you shouldn't have gone, because I was kind of mentally unstable. But don't get me wrong, they had a good childhood. We went to a lot of places, we've done a lot of things. I'm sure they knew I loved them, but it wasn't ideal, because I was undiagnosed neurodivergent, and all the time I was wondering, what the fuck's wrong with me?
And were you a single mother for all three of your children?
Um, so I've got 4 children, and
Oh, four.
yes, so basically, I was really, because unfortunately, So my self-worth was always very, very low. So I would pick a partner. I've only ever in my life had 3 boyfriends. I'm a very loyal, very like traditional, and all of them partners have been for like a decade or so. So they've all been long-term relationships. You know, I had one of 6 years, one of 9 years, and one of like I've always had really long-term relationships because I'm very loyal. And even if the person is very bad to me, I will stay with them and keep trying. And I'm like a bit of a traditionalist. It's caused me a lot of problems, but that's what happens. So
Mm.
but the thing is, I didn't think I was worth somebody that was great, or somebody that had a good job, or someone that treated me so well and took me out. So what I would do is I would go for somebody that was very broken and gave me a shit time, and I would think, it's okay, Ellie, you don't deserve someone amazing, but you can fix them to be amazing. And so I would go for someone really, really bad, someone really, really traumatized, and then I would do my best to try and fix them, which obviously if that person doesn't want to be fixed, it doesn't work.
Right.
So unfortunately I went through life attracting people that were quite broken because, you know, I felt sorry for them. I didn't have self-worth. You know, I'm a fixer. And so that has been another issue. And I think if I wasn't neurodivergent, or if I'd known I was neurodivergent growing up, my confidence would have been, what I did with my daughter specifically is I fill her with so much confidence that she doesn't feel like she has to settle. So I'm sure when I'm hope to God, when she's older and she meets a man, if they give her some bullshit level, she'd be like, I'm better than that. But when someone gave me bullshit level when I was growing up, I'd be like, thank you, you know, I thank you so much. You know, I will accept that
Right.
because I'm lucky I'm getting anything. So I think that's why it's important with neurodivergence, because it doesn't just affect you in one way. It can affect your future relationships, your children's health, everything. So yes, I was a single mum because I was a bad picker.
Okay. And I just asked because we saw kind of your childhood trauma and we see where you're
Yeah.
at now. And I was just curious about all that time between the trauma and the diagnosis, kind of how your life was. And it sounded like you obviously had a lot of hardships, but you managed everything
Yeah.
seemingly well. And it seems like you were successful in most of what you did. And now you actually have this huge community and the podcast, as you mentioned. I'd love to just get a little bit into that conversation about what the podcast is for and who it serves.
So as I said earlier, like it didn't start off like it just started off with a Facebook, and then I always wanted to write a book for years, because I've had, you know, even some of the experiences we've touched on, that's nothing. You know, I've had some crazy
Right.
arse experiences over the years, and I wanted to write a book for my children, so that if something ever happens to me, they I explained to them enough about things, but I wanted them to have something that they could have a real explanation of why I did the things I did and why I think the way I think. But unfortunately, a book is not something that I can write. I don't think in a linear fashion. It's just not my thing. And I was thinking, what can I do? And then someone suggested to me a couple of months ago. It was only about April time. Ellie, you're really good at talking. You know, I'm not good at talking. I don't talk in a linear fashion. I'm all over the place, but I'm down to earth and I will talk with everyone and I can get on with everyone. They said, but why don't you make a podcast? And I thought, no. But then I remembered that if you make a podcast, you don't have to be on camera. You know, I can just
Mm.
talk and no one has to see me. I can
Right,
even be
right.
anonymous. So that's why I started off as Ellie AuDHD, because my name is actually Shelley. I just shorten it to Ellie. So I thought, you know, no one would be able to find me. You know, I can do this all anonymous, and my kids can always be left with all these podcasts. So if something happens to me, you know, they can know why I am the way I am. And so that's how it started off. So in April, I started off just like speaking into my phone and uploading it to Spotify. But quite quickly, I got subscribers. So I got put up onto like I had so many views that they offered me subscriptions and stuff like that, Spotify. And, you know, I've only had my Facebook since April, but I've already got a community of quite a few thousand. You know, it's gone better than I thought. I never thought that I could make use of the things that I had and that I could talk about. But fortunately, my neurodivergent quirks and my trauma has made this happen. And that's why I think, you know, thank God I don't even know if I would change my neurodivergence or my childhood trauma, because you know what? It's got me where I am today. I'm very happy. I feel like I'm helping people. I get messages every day from, and I'm a people pleaser. So I find it really hard not to message back everyone. A lot of people message me. I get hundreds of messages every day of people that want me to help them, and they can't afford help, and I feel like I've got to help everyone, but I can't do it anymore. It's been something I've had to accept. I cannot message everyone back. But I feel like if I didn't go through all of this stuff, I wouldn't be where I am now. And I feel like I've finally found the authentic me. I'm finally happy. I've been single for about a decade now. It works for me. I don't think relationships work for me. I've been single for a decade. I found work is my hyper focus, but I found a work that I can do that is a hyper focus that's helping people, and I love fixing people and helping people, so that it all ties in together. I feel like I finally found myself, and the podcast is definitely, I do coaching and I do mentorship and I do this Facebooky things, but the podcast is definitely my happy place.
Mm,
It's definitely what I like to do. But I'm lucky that I work for a company, I freelance, and I do mentoring and stuff like that. So luckily, I'm okay for the financial side, but I would just love to do podcasts forever.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally
But
get that.
I'm so passionate about, I want people to know, when people listen to me and they're like, oh my God, maybe I was neurodivergent all along, because I feel like a lot of neurodivergent people are presenting like, oh, I just forgot my keys. That's so cute. Or there's a real clinical aspect where people are talking about neurodivergence in a way that people don't understand. I don't think
Mm,
there's very often that middle ground where
right.
people come up to me and say, hey, Ellie, I pee myself. Is that normal? I can't say that to anyone else. But I feel like with you, I can say that. And I like the fact that people can be real and people can be honest with me. I think that's what's so important. I'm not clinical. I'm not claiming to be a doctor. I've got qualifications in therapy and stuff like that, but I'm not using them. I don't want to use them. I just want to be me, and I want to be approachable. And that's the platform that I'm trying to build for people.
I love that. And we're going to have the links in the description below for people to check out and find your content. And
Yeah, you don't have to
hopefully,
be
yeah.
neurodivergent, even if you've got a family member that's neurodivergent or you want to know about neurodivergence. I don't want to see your statement saying you're neurodivergent. If you're a nice person and you're not bigoted, you come in our community and you make yourself at home. It is a place for everyone. I there's 48 people or 48,000 people in my group right now, and I take it as my own personal thing to moderate the shit out of that group. If there's any bullying, I will chuck someone out. There's a lot of scammers. Neurodivergent groups, we attract a lot of scammers because people think they can scam us. I take it upon my personal self to make sure that community is very safe, and I have some amazing moderators that do that with me that I know personally, because I won't let anyone else, because I'm scared of
Right.
people getting scammed and etc. But everyone, as long as you are not, in any way a nasty person, you couldn't have flaws, but if you are going to be kind to the people in our community, come on in. Everyone is welcome, diagnosed or not.
And I always put forward, get educated in all these matters, whether they affect you personally or not, because you never know
Mhm.
when they will.
Yeah,
Whether that's, a relationship, having children,
children.
or a new friend that is different. And I think say always ask the question if you have friends who are neurodivergent, always ask what you can do differently to best serve them or to best understand their needs if they are different. And so I think it's really important that we're always getting educated and being there for one another. So, Ellie, thank you so much for guesting on the show today and
Oh,
sharing
thank
about
you
your
so
life.
much. You wasn't scary at all.
Thank you. Thank you.
It was quite endearing in a mummy way, like, oh, you're very lovely. So honestly,
Thank you.
thank you so much. I think shows like this matter because you're spreading awareness yourself. So honestly, thank you so much for having me. I hope I didn't talk too much. I talk a lot, but that's ADHD. So thank you.
No, that's what podcasts were made for. This isn't YouTube Shorts or Instagram. This is the long form, and it is the necessity of long form in making the changes that we want to see. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Whiskey.